Well, good afternoon and welcome to another of Turk's Spring Science Speak seminars. My name is Jeff Schlatter. I'm the director of the UC Davis Tahoe Environmental Research Center. To learn more about Turk, the research we conduct here and around the world, the public education and citizen science programs we provide for the local and regional community, and our work with agencies in the Tahoe Basin and beyond, please visit our website, tahoe.ucdavis.edu. You can also find out how to follow us on social media, how you can participate in our activities and help support the work we do, including these monthly lectures. For those of you interested in learning about being a docent at Turk, the 2021 docent training program is scheduled to be happening June 17th, June 22nd, and June 24th. All plans are subject to change, however, but we're keeping our fingers crossed. So go to our website if you're interested in signing up and being a docent, a live docent for this coming year. One of the goals of our seminars is to facilitate interaction, dialogue, and discussion, despite the limitations of Zoom. With these technological impediments, we will be attempting to address questions at the conclusion of today's presentation via the Q&A, question and answer function on Zoom. The only way to ask questions or make comments and have them addressed is to type them into Q&A, and our presenter will try to get to as many as possible at the conclusion of her presentation. Before I introduce today's speaker, however, I wanted to alert you to a very special upcoming Science Speaks lecture. On May 13th, we have a presentation called Rethinking Fire, Cultural Burning, and the Art of Not Fighting Fire. And so we will have Beth Rose Middleton from the UC Davis Department of Native American Studies, the Honorable Ron W. Good, the tribal chairman of the North Fork Mono Tribe, and Herman Fillmore, Cultural Language Resources Director of the Washoe Tribe of Nevada and California, for a conversation about the Native American practice of cultural burning. So to find out more about that and other upcoming events such as kayaking around Lake Tahoe, go to the website tahoe.ucdavis.edu/events. Okay, so today's seminar with Dr. Catherine Olmsted, Conspiracy Theories and American Democracy, comes at a most timely juncture in our history. While conspiracy theories have always been with us, and sometimes eliciting eye rolls or head shaking, they now appear to be increasingly impacting our lives and our democracy itself. This is an area that our speaker, Catherine Olmsted, is an expert in. Dr. Olmsted is a professor of history at UC Davis. Her areas of expertise include, obviously, conspiracy theories, government secrecy, espionage, counterintelligence, and anti-communism. So with that, I'd like to give Dr. Olmsted a big virtual welcome to Turk.
Great, thank you very much, Jeff, for that nice introduction. Let me share my screen. All right. Okay, yes. Well, thank you very much to Heather for inviting me in the center, and for all of you for coming. I am very distressed to have to say that my research expertise on this particular issue has become so relevant, but that is the world that we're living in today. All right, so today I want to talk about conspiracy theories and American democracy. I'm going to begin by just reminding us all of how important it is in our current political context to understand conspiracy theories, their relevance in our political environment today. And then I want to back up a little and talk about how I got interested in this particular topic, my research on conspiracy theories in the United States, and then end by looking at conspiracy theories in the last 10 years in the United States, the 10 years since I published the first edition of my book, and talk about how and why conspiracy theories have become so much more widespread, even just in the last decade. All right, but let's begin. I'm going to begin by taking you back to the events of earlier this year, to the January 6th insurrection. As you know, many of the people who joined the mob that stormed the Capitol on January 6th were proponents of various conspiracy theories. So there were people like the man pictured here, who were believers in QAnon, which is a conspiracy theory that posits that there is a secret ring of cannibalistic pedophiles that rules the world, and that this ring includes leaders of the Democratic Party and Hollywood elites who kidnap children, rape them, kill them, and drink their blood. So there were proponents of QAnon who participated in the takeover of the Capitol. There were also prominent proponents of the coronavirus as a hoax conspiracy theory. For example, the producer of a very popular film called Plandemic participated in the takeover. And then finally, of course, everyone who participated believed in the conspiracy theory that the election had been stolen and that Donald Trump had actually won the election. And that was part of their motivation for taking over the Capitol. They wanted to stop the counting of electoral votes because they believed that the election had been rigged. So this is just one recent example of how conspiracy theories are leading to these very dangerous situations in American politics. So before I go on, I should probably define my terms, because there is a lot of debate in the conspiracy theory scholarly community about how to define a conspiracy theory. So let me talk about that. First of all, everybody agrees on the definition of a conspiracy. This is actually a legal term, which is conspiracy is when two or more people get together in secret to do something illegal. So you need all three of those elements for a conspiracy to take place. You can't have a conspiracy of one. You cannot have a conspiracy for good. You cannot have a conspiracy out in the open. Okay, so everybody agrees on what a conspiracy is. But what about a conspiracy theory? Well, I believe that I want to define conspiracy theories in a rather broad way, because the term has come to be pejorative, to seem judgmental. So I define it as an interpretation that posits a conspiracy. So in other words, this definition allows for conspiracy theories that could turn out to be true. An example of this would be in Watergate. The Washington Post reporters who were pursuing the Watergate story in the Nixon White House had a conspiracy theory about the Nixon White House, and it turned out to be true. Right? So the term conspiracy theory can encompass those kinds of theories that do in fact end up being proven. All right, so that's the definition. As we know, though, many conspiracy theories have other elements. They have elements of people believing that there's a secret group that rules the world, that everything happens for a reason, that everything is connected and nothing is as it seems. Now, how did I get interested in studying conspiracy theories? Well, I actually got interested back in the 1990s when I published my first book. So this is the cover of my first book. I actually went to Davis, to UC Davis, to get my PhD. I did my research for my dissertation here. It became my first book, published in 1996. And this book looked at events that had happened in the United States in the 1970s. Investigations by members of Congress and members of the press into abuses of power by the CIA and the FBI. So this was the topic of my dissertation, these investigations. And the most prominent of these investigations was headed by the man on the left here holding a CIA dart gun. His name was Senator Frank Church, and he was from Idaho, and his investigation was known as the Church Committee. This was the best known of these investigations, but there were many congressional investigations in the 1970s, right after Watergate, when a number of members of Congress believed that it didn't end with Watergate, that Watergate perhaps was just the tip of the iceberg, and there were many other examples of abuses of power in the executive branch. So investigations like that, led by the Church Committee, looked into the history of the CIA and FBI and whether they had ever abused their power. So the Church Committee and the other committees in Congress ended up producing a whole shelf full of reports based on their investigations. And the Church Committee, for example, revealed that the CIA had tried to kill several different foreign leaders, including especially Fidel Castro of Cuba, and had even conspired with the mafia to try to kill Fidel Castro. The Church Committee also revealed that the CIA had a drug testing program called MKUltra, which in some cases meant that the CIA put LSD in the drinks of unsuspecting American citizens. The Church Committee and other committees also revealed that the FBI had conducted illegal spying on American citizens, including a lot of spying on the civil rights movement, and in particular, spying on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., that it had tried to amass a lot of evidence of improper activities by Dr. King, and then had used that evidence in a letter that an FBI official wrote to Dr. King, suggesting that the FBI was going to reveal information about him unless it implied Dr. King killed himself. So this is a picture. On the left side is the letter as it appeared in the 1970s, redacted, and now we have the whole unredacted version. So all of these investigations in the 1970s, they were the subject of my dissertation and my first book. And I was particularly interested in how these investigations led to a further decline in Americans' trust in the government. What you're seeing here is a graph of the percentage of Americans who said they trusted the federal government to do the right thing most of the time. So you can see in the 1960s, about 2/3 of Americans said that they trusted the federal government to do the right thing most of the time. But then with the Vietnam War and the Watergate scandal, that number started to plummet. And the arrow was pointing right at the period there, represented by the Church Committee and the other investigations, where the Church Committee and these congressional investigators were very idealistic. And they thought, you know what we can do after Watergate is we can restore Americans' faith in the government by being transparent and finding any other examples of improper activities by the government. And then we'll reveal this information and Americans will know that they can trust their government again. But instead, what happened is that the revelation of these conspiracies led Americans to distrust their government even more. And as you can see also from the graph there would be ups and downs over the subsequent years, but the overall trend line would be downward as fewer and fewer Americans trusted their government as the decades went on. All right, so that was the subject of my dissertation, published my book. It's an academic book, of course. It is my dissertation. It was published by the University of North Carolina Press. So not something you buy in the airport, right? So I really didn't expect to get any attention for it outside of academic journals. But soon afterwards, I started getting contacted by people around the country. I started getting mail in my box at UC Davis, my mailbox. I started getting phone calls. And it was kind of hard to find me because I wasn't even regular faculty at that point. I was adjunct and I would change offices every quarter. And I started getting these phone calls from ordinary Americans who, it turned out, read everything they could find about the Church Committee and were very engaged in the subject of these investigations in the 1970s because I discovered they believed that they were victims of government conspiracies. In some cases, They had very persuasive stories about how they believed that they had been illegally surveilled by the FBI in the 1960s because they had protested the Vietnam War. Some cases, they had less persuasive stories. There was a whole subgroup of people who believed that they had been victims of the drug testing program, MK Ultra. And I'll never forget the phone call from the man who told me that he really needed me to recommend a dentist to him because the CIA had put transmitters in his teeth, were telling him what to do, and all the dentists he went to couldn't find the transmitters. So I got all of this information. I heard from all of these people, and I started keeping a file of the letters and my notes on the phone calls. And then I got one particularly bizarre call one day from a woman who said that her boyfriend had been in the CIA, that he was a whistleblower, and he was running around the country and the FBI was chasing him. And she wanted to talk to me for advice. And I thought she was one of my, more mentally unbalanced correspondents. So I didn't think much of it, but I did take notes. I kept the file of notes. And a few years later, I was reading a newspaper story about a man the FBI had arrested who claimed to be a CIA whistleblower. And it was the same names. It turned out that her story was correct. The man existed. It was true. So all of this got me thinking as a scholar about how interesting it was, about the difficulty of telling the difference between crazy, not crazy, conspiracy theories about the US government, particularly when those conspiracy theories involved US government secret agencies. I found that it was often not easy to evaluate conspiracy theories about US government secret agencies because these agencies had, in fact, committed conspiracies, abused power in the past. And so the line between a crazy person and a real victim was very hard to discern. And at the least, these documented examples of real government conspiracies helped to explain the hold of anti-government conspiracy theories on the American public. So I thought what I'm really interested in here is the history of this dynamic relationship between revelations of real government conspiracies and conspiracy theories about the government. And so that's what I started to research for my next book. I called it Real Enemies, from the saying, even paranoids have real enemies, because it focused on how real government conspiracies inspire conspiracy theories about the government. And it came out in 2009 with Oxford University Press. Now, what I did in the book was, first of all, I did a brief survey of conspiracy theories up until the 20th century in the United States. As I discovered, as I got into the world of scholarship on conspiracy theories, these theories have been found by scholars in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. So they have a long history. In the Middle Ages, there were many examples of quite lethal conspiracy theories. For example, in Europe, there was the blood libel conspiracy theory, in which Christians believed that Jews were kidnapping their children and killing them and using their blood in these religious rituals. So somewhat similar to QAnon today. So there was the blood libel conspiracy theory in the Middle Ages. But most scholars of conspiracy theory believe that modern conspiracies, as conspiracy theories as we understand them, began with the printing press, because that made it much easier for conspiracy theorists to spread their theories. And it's particularly after the French Revolution in 1789 that you get recognizably modern conspiracy theories, where there are people who publish pamphlets and books saying this event that happened, in this case, the French Revolution, isn't as it seems. In fact, there's a secret group plotting to take over the world, and this is just one of their first moves. So there were many popular conspiracy theory books about the French Revolution that circulated in Europe and then in the United States in the 1790s and on into the 1800s. All right, now, so the United States got a lot of these conspiracy theories about the French Revolution, particularly that a group called the Illuminati had organized the French Revolution. And then throughout the 1800s in the United States, there were many, many conspiracy theories that were very popular. Some of them involved secret societies. For example, this is an example of a conspiracy theory book that was very popular that alleged that the Masons had killed a man because he was about to spill all their secrets. There's a lot of suspicion of the Masons in the United States, so much so that there was even a political party in the 1830s and 40s called the Anti-Masonic Party that was dedicated to, removing the threat of the Masons to American society. Also, in the 19th century, there were a lot of conspiracy theories about religious or racial minorities, particularly Catholics, Jews, and Mormons were the targets of lots of conspiracy theories that sometimes led to violence in the 19th century. Right. My book really, though, begins with World War I, because I saw that as a pivotal moment in the history of American conspiracy theories. Because up to that point, the most popular conspiracy theories in the United States were about secret societies or marginalized groups, Jews or Catholics in particular. But starting in World War I, you have a new, really popular genre of conspiracy theories, and that is conspiracy theories about the US government. And this is precisely at the moment where the US government starts to expand. It gets much larger. It has secret agencies that start monitoring the public. And it's at that moment that a lot of Americans start then believing conspiracy theories about the US government. So my book started chronologically going through the 20th century, looking at these moments when conspiracy theories about the government evolved. So starting in World War I, each war decision in the 20th century inspired a lot of conspiracy theories, where people who opposed the war said, it isn't as it seems. We're not in this war for what the government says. It's actually because there's this secret group that has, tricked us into war. So an example of that would be the Pearl Harbor conspiracy theories that emerged on the far right during World War II. People who were opposed to fighting World War II said Franklin Roosevelt had deliberately ignored information that the Japanese were going to attack Pearl Harbor because he wanted to fight World War II. So there's more and more of these anti-government conspiracy theories where there's somebody in the US government who is in league with this secret group that rules the world. The most popular conspiracy theories in the 1950s were about communists in the US government. Senator Joe McCarthy charged that there were hundreds of communists who had infiltrated the US government in the early 1950s and were secretly undermining the government to try and turn it over to the Soviet Union. So you have all of these examples of conspiracy theories in US politics, even before you get to the 1960s. In the 1960s, though, it's another important pivotal moment in the history of American conspiracy theories, because it's with the assassination of John F. Kennedy that conspiracy theories really start being popular at the grassroots. It's not just pundits or senators who are expounding these conspiracy theories, but lots of ordinary people who believe them. So President Kennedy was killed in Dallas in November of 1963. And 2 days later, his alleged assassin was killed. And a lot of Americans very quickly began to support conspiracy theories that the US government was hiding some sort of conspiracy, because the government soon came out with an official report saying that, it was a lone gunman. But a lot of people rejected this. So this is a graph showing a percentage of Americans in the first 50 years after the assassination who believed that the government was lying, that in fact there was a conspiracy to kill the president. In fact, in the 1970s, when the Church Committee was operating, something around 80% of Americans believed that there was a conspiracy to kill John Kennedy. And they started forming groups and meeting at libraries and networking with one another. Even before the internet, they could find one another, these JFK assassination researchers, as they called each other, and themselves, and begin to develop their theories about the Kennedy assassination and alleged US government complicity in that assassination. So that was the 1960s. By the 1970s, conspiracism really becomes mainstreamed in American society, where more and more people believe various conspiracy theories about the US government. And the event that really triggers this is, of course, the Watergate scandal. Here's a picture of Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward, reporters on the Washington Post, who broke the Watergate story, who, as I said at the beginning, are examples of people who had a conspiracy theory that turned out to be true. And as all of the details of the many different conspiracies associated with Watergate came out to the public in the early 1970s, mid 1970s, more and more Americans started believing in other conspiracies that the US government might have committed. And so now we come to that event that I started with, the Church Committee of the mid 1970s, as Senator Church was trying so hard to restore Americans' faith in government by revealing more conspiracies by the US government. So many people reacted by saying, well, okay, if it's true that they did that, if they really did try and kill Fidel Castro with an exploding seashell and, worked with the mafia to try and put poison in his milkshake, what else did the CIA do that we just don't know about, that Senator Church didn't find out, or perhaps even colluded with the CIA to cover up? So the Church Committee and other investigations like this lead to this further escalation of Americans' fears about their own government. There's another batch of conspiracy theories about the government that come out of the Iran-Contra affair in the late 1980s, when people in the Reagan White House traded arms for hostages and then used the profits from those deals to fund a counter-revolutionary army in Central America. So the Iran-Contra scandal came out in 1986. It causes another big dive in Americans' trust in the government and inspires new conspiracy theories. A lot of them, of course, on the left among Reagan's opponents, but also on the far right of American politics, as a lot of people on the far right begin to believe that you can't trust anyone in the government, even someone like Ronald Reagan, who seems like a responsible conservative. By the 1990s, conspiracy theories are very popular in American popular culture. You can see examples of them everywhere in the movies and on TV, especially in the X-Files, whose themes are, trust no one and the truth is out there, and posits this massive government conspiracy centered in the FBI. It's one of the cult hits of the 1990s. All right, I started teaching at Davis full-time in 2001. And one of the things I noticed right away that once again sparked my interest in studying conspiracy theories is that a lot of my students believed in 9/11 conspiracy theories from the fall of 2001, that they were very engaged in these and starting to spread them and trying to convince me. So the 9/11 attacks and then the 2003 US invasion of Iraq helps spur this new era of conspiracy theorizing about the government, as up to about a third of the American public tells pollsters that they believe that the Bush administration either knew in advance about the 9/11 attacks and failed to stop them, or actually helped to carry them out. All right, so this is the period of the George W. Bush administration when I was writing my book, Real Enemies. So again, looking at this graph of Americans' trust in the government, You can see it's very high in the 60s, falls during Vietnam and Watergate, falls a little more in the 70s, goes up when Reagan becomes president, but then once again collapses with Iran-Contra, goes up in the 90s, and then collapses after 9/11 and continues to collapse throughout the Bush administration, reaches a very low level where it stays up to the present. So as I was writing my book during the George W. Bush administration, I really believed at the time that the Bush administration's lack of candor about the Iraq War was help fueling these conspiracy theories. And so as I was having the book in copy editing, Barack Obama won the election of 2008. And I called my publisher in a panic and said, you realize that Obama is promising all of this transparency in government, and there's not going to be any more conspiracy theories about the US government. We're going to go into a period where conspiracy theories are really marginalized again. So you've got to get this book out before Obama becomes president, which they did. They put it out in early January of 2009. So I learned soon afterwards, of course, that I was completely wrong about that and that I should never try and predict the future. I am a historian, I look at the past, but I have no idea what will happen in the future. All right, so what we all discovered living through that era is that in fact, government trust never recovered from that low level that it hit in about 2008, and that conspiracy theories about the government started to spread even faster. All right, so why? What was it that changed that made it so that that line of trust in government essentially flatlined from 2008, and that Americans became even more eager to believe in conspiracy theories about their government? Well, there are several reasons I think that conspiracy theories became so popular and prominent over those years. First of all, of course, there is the internet, and then especially social media in the late 2000s, which makes it so much easier for people to post and share and spread misinformation, so that there were no gatekeepers that conspiracy theorists had to go through in order to get their conspiracy theories out through the mainstream media. They could just go directly to alternative sites on the internet, or eventually just share information peer-to-peer without having to deal with the media at all. So the internet and social media plays a major role in this. Social scientists are still trying to quantify exactly how much. And then there's the fact that there are people who discover that they can make a lot of money peddling conspiracy theories on the internet. So here, for example, is a picture of Alex Jones. Alex Jones was started out on public access TV in Austin, Texas in the 90s, moved to talk radio, and then in the 2000s got a very popular website called InfoWars, that at first was sort of an equal opportunity conspiracy theory purveyor, where he had conspiracy theories at the left and the right. But by the late 2000s, he had really become a figure of the far right and discovered he could make a lot of money by spreading these conspiracy theories to Americans who had extreme right-wing views. So you have the internet, you have social media, you have entrepreneurs like Alex Jones figuring out that they can monetize selling fear on the internet. And also, though, you start seeing in the 2010s some political leaders who realize that they can also advantage themselves by using conspiracy theories. And one of the most prominent examples, of course, is Donald Trump. So Trump started to get interested in running for president in 2012, in 2011. So a year before the 2012 election, before Obama was going to run for re-election, Trump started testing the waters to see if maybe he could run for president. And he tested the waters. He got involved in national politics by questioning whether Barack Obama had been born in the United States. And he started giving lots of interviews that questioned the authenticity of Obama's birth certificate and suggesting that Obama was covering up his heritage and his African birth. He continued to spread this theory to suggest that there was a massive cover-up that might involve murder. He encouraged hackers to break into Obama's records to see if they could find evidence that he had faked his birth. And then he began to suggest that Obama was not just born in Africa, but also some sort of secret Muslim, some enemy of the United States. Now, what was particularly surprising to me as a scholar of conspiracy theories is that there was no real theory here. It wasn't that there was some foundation that Trump was using to then leap to the conclusion that Obama had not been born in the United States. There was no like unexplained trip that his mother took to Africa. It was just constant raising questions, sowing doubts with no evidence, and casting doubt on the actual documentation of Obama's birth. Now, we know that Barack Obama was born in Hawaii in 1961 about as well as we know any historical fact, not only because of the birth certificate, but also the newspaper announcements, eyewitness accounts, people who wrote letters. It's very well documented. And yet, close to a third and then a majority of Republicans began entertaining the notion that Obama was actually not eligible to be president. Now, that was Trump's first conspiracy theory that he spread, but he also entertained a lot of other conspiracy theories, including anti-vaxxer conspiracy theories, where he gave interviews suggesting that vaccines caused autism. He suggested that climate change might be a hoax. And then he began questioning many of the numbers that were coming out of the Obama administration, the unemployment rate, Obamacare enrollment numbers, and then over and over again, whether Obama had been elected fairly in 2012. And he began suggesting that there was massive electoral fraud in this country being conducted by the Democratic Party. And this, of course, all culminates with his conspiracy theory after the 2020 election, that the election had been stolen and that it had been rigged and that he was the rightful winner of the election, the conspiracy theory that motivated that mob that stormed the Capitol in January. So as we lived through this era, I realized that that period of the George W. Bush administration, when I had been writing my book, helped explain the rise of Donald Trump and the popularity of conspiracy theories by the 2010s, that it had been in the first decade of the 21st century that so many Americans had lost faith in the government, that we had gone into this era when very few Americans trusted the government to do just about anything. Because so many people had lost their faith in the government, they were primed to believe that it was possible that the president was lying about his birthplace, that he was ineligible, that some sort of secret group had plotted back in 1961 to place these fake birth announcements in the Honolulu newspaper so that eventually he would grow up and become president and do their bidding. That it was because of this decline in trust in government and the repeated feeling over the years by Americans that their government had done things that made it untrustworthy, that helps explain how President Trump and others and Alex Jones and other entrepreneurs were able to sow these seeds of doubt in the American public. Now, of course, it isn't just about a decline in trust in government. There's also been a decline in trust in the media in the United States, although it's not nearly as extreme, and it tends to be much more polarized by party, in that Republicans trust the mass media much less than Democrats do. But it's another important trend, because it means, where do Americans get their facts if they don't trust the mainstream media or the government? Well, they trust people who come up with alternative facts. This is not just an American phenomenon. It's happening all over the globe, and is helping to lead to a surge of populism, right-wing populism in most cases, in many governments throughout the world. So in 2019, my publisher, Oxford University Press, asked me to come up with a new edition of the book, a 10th anniversary edition, that took into account the last 10 years, 2009 to 2019, and why conspiracy theories had spread so much further and so much more quickly than I had anticipated when I finished the book 10 years ago. So I wrote a new epilogue on the Trump era. And as I wrote that epilogue, I discovered that my own views on conspiracy theories had really changed in those 10 years. I understood why Americans believe conspiracy theories. I had begun this project with a great deal of sympathy for people who believed in conspiracy theories about their government. This is because my research on the Church Committee had shown that the government did conduct conspiracies, that the government was sometimes conspiring against its citizens, that it had conspired against its citizens in ways that might seem improbable and bizarre if we did not know to our sorrow, know better. We know that the CIA tested drugs on unsuspecting American citizens. We know that the FBI spied illegally on American citizens. We know that the White House engaged in cover-ups to hide its lawless version of the Constitution. And in some ways, you could argue that to know the recent facts of American history is to be a conspiracy theorist. Right? So that was my point of view when the book came out in 2009. Right? Since then, I believe that these theories changed over time. That even though Americans have always entertained conspiracy theories, something has changed in the last decade. And that is that people in power indiscriminately spread these conspiracy theories, use them as political weapons, or use them as ways to make money. And they spread these conspiracy theories with a very specific goal, and an ambitious goal, and that is to destroy our faith in government and science, and even any kind of community spirit. That we have people in public life for the first time in American history who are really using these theories for partisan advantage, and rejecting fact-based evidence. And what they're doing is encouraging people to be cynical rather than skeptical. A democracy needs skeptical citizens. We all need to be skeptical of the government to hold it accountable. What a democracy doesn't need is cynical citizens, people who say, you can't trust anyone. There is a secret group who controls the world, who's secretly manipulating the government. That sort of cynicism can be very dangerous. Now, sometimes these theories seem so ludicrous that it seems like we shouldn't pay any attention to them, like QAnon, like, oh, that's so silly. Why would we care? But unfortunately, they are becoming more and more prominent, and we have to engage with them. And so I would encourage all of you to go to fact-checking websites like politifact.com, factcheck.org, or snopes.com whenever you have a question about something that you see on Facebook, something that someone tells you, a conspiracy theory, and these fact check websites do a great job. They have whole teams of reporters whose whole job it is to look into the truth of these conspiracy theories. So I think it's important that we all continue to remain engaged and don't just ignore or dismiss these conspiracy theories, to push back and to say, no, Barack Obama was not born in Africa, and no, lizard people are not real. And we need to do this because the stakes could not be higher. Our democracy is in peril. All right, so on that grim note, I will end my presentation.
Thank you, Catherine. That was fascinating and a little bit scary at the same time. Okay, well, on that note, I wanted to thank Catherine one more time. I wanted to thank everybody for attending. I found this fascinating, and I will maintain and even increase my level of skepticism and cynicism from everything I read, and hope everybody does the same. So anyway, trust the facts, trust science, and hopefully we'll see you at our next seminar. Bye, everybody.